On this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, did Houston settle? We'll talk about not getting Armstead, but Tim Settle Jr. for the Houston Texans and looking at the Joe Mixon extension while also analyzing cereal being cheap.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If this is your first time listening or watching the Locked On Texans podcast, please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And thank you to all of our returning listeners coming back as we continue to talk Texans, closing out this week on a nice Friday, looking at some of the decisions the Houston Texans made. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in your pocket if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. We close out today's show looking at the YouTube comments. In the second segment, we analyze the Joe Mixon extension. Also look at Nick Caserio missing out, quote unquote. Did he miss out? Did he make the right financial decisions? That'll be interesting to look at. And I think the best part of that conversation is we'll lead from the first segment looking at no Arik Armstead. Instead, the Houston Texans signed Tim Settle. By the way, I'm your Texans football analyst, Johnson Sports Guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, Cody M. Davis, Houston Texans credential media member, Sports Illustrated's own. The Houston Texans attempted to get Arik Armstead here in Houston, but a deal fell through. They were not able to work out a deal. Instead, Arik Armstead signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars, a 3-year deal worth $51 million. And then for Houston to pivot from that move, they ended up signing Tim Settle, who they already was working out, already in contact with his agent. So he had a visit here in Houston, 2-year deal worth $7 million. So you look at an annual salary of $3.5 million compared to you look at Armstead, an annual salary of around 15 million, 15.5. So maybe a little bit more than that, honestly. But when you look at this deal for the Houston Texans, does that make sense? Was Armstead worth the contract compared to Tim Settle? Because this is my thought process on this whole debate, right? And I think this is why we'll look at Nick Caserio possibly being cheap, quote unquote. Not signing Armstead is detrimental, yes, because in the midst of that, no Sheldon Rankins, Malik Collins was traded. And so you're missing out on 2 guys right there. Now Tim Settle brings in, you're only missing out on 1 guy in the D tackle unit. I get that. But that cost may have been too much for the Texans when they still have other needs. And this is day 5 of free agency today on Friday. And now we're looking at the possibility of Houston, as we've been told here on the show, per sources, they are still analyzing the safety market. And so maybe that money could have been used for another area for this team. But I'm okay with missing out on Arik Armstead simply because that money can be allocated elsewhere.
I'm not surprised that they didn't land Arik Armstead. And John, if you remember, we was told a couple of days ago when things started to get going between the Texans and Armstead, we was told that, part of the reason why the deal fell through when they tried to trade him straight up for Malik Collins was the fact they did not want to take on his contract. So 49ers release him. He goes to Jacksonville for a 3-year deal worth $51 million, and the annual salary is actually somewhere in the ballpark to 17 to 17.5 million. And that is important because, John, yesterday's show, after all the moves that they made between day 2 and day 3, the Houston Texans were only playing around somewhere in the ballpark to 18 to 20 million. And like you just said, they still had a lot of other holes to fill, whether they go on the market and try to bring in a wide receiver, or, you know, to your point, they still have their eyes set on bringing in a safety. And the safety market as of right now, going into day 4 of free agency, is still pretty good. So, you know, I truly do believe that Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans made the right decision. I'm not too concerned about them passing on Arik Armstead, because with the number 23 overall pick, the Houston Texans will 9 times out of 10 select a D tackle. For those of you guys who don't remember, at the NFL Combine a couple of weeks ago, I had an opportunity to talk to Coach D'Amico Ryans and ask him what are some of his early evaluations of the prospects on that defensive front. And he said that they have a lot of guys that they like, and a lot of guys that they can possibly choose from, starting with Byron Murphy from the University of Texas. So, like I say, man, I'm not too concerned about them passing on Armstead. However, this is another example as to why you shouldn't be concerned or mad, because this is another move where Nick Caserio, Coach D'Amico Ryans, and the Houston Texans stuck to who they are, because this is another prime example of them not landing a player, and the player goes on to sign, you know, 3 to 4 year deals worth X amount million. So I'm not too concerned about this. And who knows, the Houston Texans might end up getting a more impactful player in the draft in the next month or so.
And I also want to say this. I think the years were just important as to why Houston didn't sign Armstead as the money. Right?
Because he is getting up there in age.
He's getting up there in age, but the big Houston splash free agent signing was who? Hunter. And what did Hunter get? A 2-year deal, right?
Like 58, no, 48 million or something like 48,
that. But it was limited to a 2-year deal. I think, and this is also kind of confirmed, but money and years was a big problem as to why this deal didn't fall through for Houston, why this deal was held up, and why he was able to go ahead and get a bag out in Jacksonville. Shout out to Armstead and his team. Getting the bag is always going to be celebrated here on the Locked On Texans podcast. Outside of Robert Woods' contract from last year, it was always the same to me. But they didn't get it done. And again, the asking price for Armstead was too high. And this team has shown you time and time again that they're going to spread the wealth. I don't think we're going to see a big contract until we see, well, we'll talk about Joe Mixon with discount, but, you know, Nico will be an extension, right? So I think that'll be one of those bigger contracts. I think the first really huge contract we'll see outside of Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard is going to be CJ Stroud. It'll be Laramie, Howard, Nico with his extension, and then CJ Stroud. Everybody else you'll see, and Laramie Tunsil only got a 3-year deal. I think Howard got the 4-year deal. We'll see Nico probably get a 3-year deal, maybe somewhere in the ballpark of Michael Pittman's contract from Indy. But I think the first 4 mega year deal will be CJ Stroud. Rightfully so. He's your franchise quarterback.
I throw Will in there too as well.
Well, CJ's first. CJ will probably be first because
you talking about first? Okay, I got you.
Yeah, I mean, and they're the same class, but we'll see that first mega. Like, oh my gosh,
yeah, you're right.
It'll be CJ Stroud, and so I think this is a great way to end off the week. Looking at, did Houston actually miss out? I don't think so. Not on Armstead. Maybe you can look at other players and other positions, because when we talk about Caserio missing out and penny pinching, I do have some thoughts about that. But Tim Settle is a good football player, right? He's a good backup piece between Settle, Fadakowski, Danico Autry, who can shift in and out between 3 and 5 and whatever. You're going to see Houston and that 3 tech, in that D tackle position, and that 3 tech, they're going to have interchangeable players, and each one of those players has a specific role, and I think that they'll be able to maximize that here in Houston. And what I do like is Tim Settle got him on a 2-year deal, right? Very cheap deal. Houston can kind of move on from him next year, but a $3.5 million deal as a backup who's very good. So you look at Settle, Davis, and Autry. and Fatukowski, and Kirk is still on this roster. You look at some bodies right there. Now the question is, like you mentioned, Cody, with the number 23 overall pick, does Houston draft a D tackle, or do they address wide receiver, which is something that they have yet to do in free agency outside of bringing back Noah Brown? So I think that's a very important question in itself. But we'll talk about Joe Mixon's extension and Nick Caserio penny pinching and missing out on players. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from retirement accounts elsewhere with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gives you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal information. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% matches requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Friday installment of Locked On Texans. Yesterday afternoon, we had an opportunity to hold an introductory press conference with both Hunter and Mixon. And, man, it was just great to hear both of these guys, kind of rave about D'Amico Ryans. And, John, throughout this whole entire process, we have talked about, how appealing the Houston Texans will be in this year throughout free agency, throughout the trade period and stuff, because so many players, want to play for Coach D'Amico Ryans, want to play for CJ Stroud, and want to be a part of this new culture that the Texans have established, man. And to hear both of those guys talk about it, it was very cool to see, especially Joe Mixon, hearing him say that he was hurt, disappointed by the trade. But then when he got on the phone with Coach D'Amico Ryans, he said he felt wanted. And wanted is what the Houston Texans showed him about 72 hours after the trade. They were awarding him with a 3-year contract worth $27 million. John, I like that contract. I like that extension, man, because not only did they showcase that they wanted Joe Mixon, but at the same time, it shows that they have a lot of trust and faith in Joe and that they have something truly special for Joe here in the city of Houston.
I agree. I thought that Nick Caserio was kind of showing, that he's a little different. He was changing up a little bit because $9 million per year for that extension, I thought was a couple of million larger than what I thought he'd, give over to Joe Mixon. But for me, a couple of things. Mixon has been fairly healthy during his career. So I think that's a saving grace and a good thing for the Houston Texans, extending him before he plays it down for Houston. He's been available. I think that's one of the, his traits, his good traits as a player is being available. And when he's available, he's been, a productive player, at least so far in his career for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I also looked at the understanding of this, the idea of this. Houston maybe didn't want to have to do this again next year and risk losing out on a player that they just traded for. Now, granted, it was just a 7th rounder, and they got a 7th rounder back for the Malik Collins trade. So essentially, you didn't lose nothing, right? You only gained a player in the running back room. But we've seen Houston since Lamar Miller. I don't think we've seen them have consistency at running back. From Lamar Miller old days, it was
that is true.
It was Carlos Hyde and it was Duke Johnson. Was it?
They should
Carlos
have
Hyde?
both of them.
Should have, could have, would have. Then they traded for your
David
boy
Johnson.
Traded for David Johnson. And Rex Burkhead was And then now it was Dameon Pierce and Rex Burkhead, and then the following year you couldn't get it done with Dameon Pierce to open up the season, but Motor Singletary, congrats to him and his deal in New York. He closed out the season. So there's been a carousel of different faces for Houston since Lamar Miller. And I think that when you look at who your head coach is and Bobby Sloak as your offensive coordinator, they're coming over from a team that has traditionally been successful with their running backs, especially over the last few years. And they added CMC, and they know how impactful he's been to that offense. They had an opportunity to experience it a little bit. I think it was important for them to get somebody who is still fairly young, right? At the end of that deal, Joe Mixon will be 30, 31 years old, right? And in all of these contracts in the NFL, that last year is always kind of like, we could probably move on from that contract. So they get him this year on a fairly cheap deal, I think $6 million. After that, the extension kicks in for $9 million after that. And Houston cap increase will continue to go up. They don't have a lot of huge contracts right now on this roster, which is why they got a lot of money this year. So that little $9 million ain't gonna be worth much on the roster, right? It'll be good for him as a running back, but overall, it won't be that impactful to where you look up and it's like a $15 million deal per se, and ain't no running back getting that. But you're like, oh man, that's just too much right now. That's taking up room on our cap space, or we can't pay anybody else. That won't be the problem. So congrats to Joe Mixon. This was a very good deal by Nick Caserio to get that done, so you can finally have some consistency in that running back room. Now, we look at Nick Caserio missing out on players, lost out on Sheldon Rankins by $1 million. I would have probably kept Rankins. And as we're talking about missing out on players, getting a deal done with Joe, you can look at Saquon as a player they missed out on. You can look at Armstead as a player that they missed out on. Those are probably the two where once the deals were revealed, you're kind of like, I'm okay with missing out on those two players. And with Saquon, you ended up getting Joe Mixon. With Armstead, you got Tim Settle. He's not that impactful of a player. He's not the bigger name like Armstead is. But money-wise, financially, it was a smart decision, which is what Houston has been traditionally doing under the guidance of Nick Caserio as their general manager. But I can't lie. I would have really rathered Sheldon Rankins to come back to this team. Preferred him rather than Tim Settle, who I think would be a good rotational player for Houston. But Rankins is a starter in the NFL, and he showed it to be last year. He had a very good year last year. Maybe for Houston, you're looking for a player that you want to be able to trust against the run a little bit more compared to the pass. But Rankins was a player that I thought could do just about everything on the football field pretty well. So no Malik Collins, no Sheldon Rankins, no Armstead to bring in and back that deal up to let Malik Collins go. Traded him, didn't get the deal done with Rankins. For Houston, they can't afford to miss out on any more players that are impactful at the positions that they need. And I say that to say this, Cody, before I give it back over to you. Today is day 5. By the end of today or Saturday, Houston needs to address the safety position. There's no doubt about it. There's no way around it. You have the money, in large part to not signing Armstead to that mega deal worth $17 million, right? You settle for Tim Settle, a 2-year, 3.5. So only 3.5 of that is hitting the books this year, roughly, give or take whatever the numbers are. They have the money to get it done. Sign a safety. Justin Simmons is available. Quandre Diggs is available. You need to get one of those guys into your building ASAP. Don't penny pinch out on this because you will get burned in the end.
I think for Nick, for me, it kind of comes down to whether or not I feel like they missed out on Saquon Barkley. I'm going to say no. I don't think they missed out on it, and it all comes down to, look, first and foremost, Saquon is a hell of a player. But I think for me, the one thing that I was always kind of concerned with was Saquon Barkley's availability, his durability. And that was my number one issue. everyone knew that Saquon wanted a big bag, and everybody knows. I want to say, according to DJ Bieniemy, the money that Nick Caserio didn't want to add was like somewhere in the ballpark of like $3 to like $5 million, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, Philly was willing to give him that. But I'm looking at it from a situation. One, I'm not gonna lie. After day one, I was disappointed by the news because I was like, okay, as I look at this running back market, not only did you miss out on Saquon Barkley, but you missed out on Josh Jacobs. You allowed Devin Singletary to walk. Even like Tony Pollard. I mean, Austin Eckler. I mean, I know some of those names might not be appealing to a lot of people, but at the same time, it was like after you let Devin Singletary walk, it was like, okay, what are you going to do? You cannot go into the 2024 season with Dameon Pierce as your primary running back, even though it didn't work out last year. Not saying it couldn't work out again this year, but in order for this team to take that leap, John, to your point, D'Amico, Bobby Sloyd, they come from a team where they rely heavily upon their offensive backfield. They definitely need to do something. And I think the contingency plan that they had in order to go and trade for Joe Mixon, a guy that nobody knew was even on the trading block. Nobody even saw that move coming, except for us. But that is where I say, you know what, Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans deserve kudos for that, because one, you look at a running back in Saquon Barkley, who has had, unfortunately, his career kind of hampered a little bit by injuries, and they end up saving somewhere in the ballpark to $3 to $4 million, going the cheaper route, getting Joe Mixon, who, could be just as valuable, but at the same time, as of right now, knock on wood, of course, we hope, he continues to stay healthy, fairly healthy throughout his career here in the city of Houston. But at the same time, they have somebody they can trust that can go out there and be available every single Sunday in order to get this team to the next step where they need to go. But at the same time, John, as I look at other players that they missed out on, I think I'm okay with it. I know they won. I came on here calling them your cheap team every day, but it goes back to what you have been talking about every time we talk about the possibility of Nick Caserio adding talent to the team, whether draft, free agency, trade, or whatever the case might be, waiver wire. He's always going to value the player along with what is it that the Houston Texans have to give up? What are they going to have to be committed to in terms of long year, short year, or money and all that kind of stuff? Nick Caserio once again has showed us who he is, and as of right now, I think the Houston Texans have put together a fairly really good team that can actually go out there and compete in this tough AFC. However, John, to your point, when we come back on this show on Monday, we better be talking about them adding some kind of safety.
Absolutely.
They got to do it.
But I can't wait to tell you guys about FanDuel. You can go ahead and say goodbye to busted brackets. Don't worry about those no more, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That's right. All you got to do is bet $5. If that wins, you get $200 in your pocket to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. As promised, YouTube comments. I'm going to start off with Truly Unfortunate. That's a sad name for YouTube. YouTube is a happy place unless you go down like a rabbit hole. But this comment read, Nick has turned into a top-notch GM. It's been a long time since I've had confidence in the decision-making process of the Texans front office. Day one, I thought, here we go, back to crappy decisions by the Texans. Boy, was I wrong. Cody, to watch the growth of Nick Caserio as the Texans general manager, I think, has been amazing to see, right? I mean, and this is a guy that walked into, you know who Nick Caserio is?
Who?
He's Principal Joe from Lean on Me. Don't think about it. At the beginning of Lean On Me, fights was breaking out. A teacher got jumped and had to go rush to the hospital on life support, right? Gangs was everywhere. Graffiti was all on the wall. It was a terrible school. It was a crap show of a job. And think about what Nick Caserio walked into to be this team's general manager. No first round pick, no second round pick, no quarterback, no money, no cap space, no nothing. And so
no coach.
And in year one, I found this gym in Nico. Okay, now I gotta get rid of some guys. In year two, we finally was able to get some first rounders back, and then we was able to maneuver around with the Deshaun Watson. That was a terrible, walking into that was a madhouse, right? Stingley here, and players here, and fill this out. And then in year three, right? Okay, when I got CJ, right, building this team. He is. I mean, for all Texans fans, they should be leaning on him. Like, you smoke crack, don't you? Now you go from that, and you got a team that can sing a choir because they can sing, "Oh Fair East Side, Oh Fair South Side." Nick is doing it right, man. So shout out to him. What are your thoughts on Nick Caserio and his growth as a general manager?
Man, it's been pleasing to see, and it's not just his growth as general manager, just with the team that, he has been able to build, but just, his overall conference is working together, with a head coach that he trusts, with a staff that he trusts. Because, John, I know the one thing those first 2 years, especially that first year, Lord have mercy, it just seemed like he was trying to focus too much on the eye. And I would never forget the day after they fired Lovie Smith, and he had his very first introductory press conference and stuff, and it seemed like his whole demeanor changed. And that was the first time that I saw him say "we," as in him and the McNairs. And of course, we continue to be, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, him and DeMeco Ryans, man. But I will say this. I know throughout this whole entire time, Nick Caserio, he had his moments where we questioned it. But I've always said one thing. Nick has always had an eye for talent. His very first draft, you went out there, as you mentioned, John, you go out there and find a gem in Nico Collins. You could possibly have found another gem. And
Davis Mills, that was a serviceable quarterback for the time he was in.
You're right. And even though things didn't work out with Davis, I would say, what was my favorite saying after that rookie season? He was arguably, if not the second best rookie out of that draft class. And look, he could possibly still be, because I think him and Trevor Lawrence are the only ones that's still with their original team at the start of the 2012 season. Because Justin Fields on the block, Zach Wilson on the block, Mac Jones has been traded. So, hey, say what you want about Davis Mills, but at least he still got a job here in Houston. But my thing was, I was going to wait until he cleans up this organization and see if he could find that same net in free agency with veterans. And I know we got to wait and see how these players play out in 2024, but I just go back to last year. You took a chance on Dalton Schultz. You took a chance on Devin Singletary. You took a chance, even though, he wasn't a free agent. We saw you get rid of a whole bunch of other guys, but you decided to stick with Jonathan Goddard. You brought in Blake Cashman. I'm looking at it from a standpoint, a lot of the guys that he either decided to continue taking chances on, and players who was already here, or players that he just signed to, like, those 1-year contracts, i.e. Sheldon Rankins. They end up playing a very important role for the success that we saw this Houston Texans have last season. And with the guys that he brought in this offseason, I think he's going to have an opportunity to do it again.
Yeah, and also with Davis Mills, he actually saved his franchise.
Boy, can you imagine if we had to go 2 years with Kyle Allen or Just Driscoll? Lord have mercy.
Or no, just the not being in the position to draft CJ, right, by beating the Colts that last game.
It's true.
So yeah, it all ties back to Nick, right? I thought this was kind of a funny, because I've seen this all through the comments, so I'm gonna just say it. One guy said, I'm glad to see y'all happy again. the last video was bringing me down. This was like the day one podcast. Another comment was, y'all faces to start this vid versus the last vid in comparison is hilarious. Then that comment was followed up by a big difference on their face. Day one was like paying rent, like, damn. Day two was hitting 20K on the scratch off ticket. Hey, you know what? I mean, day one was what was day one? What did we talk about for day one?
No, we just talk about all the players that they missed out on.
They missed out on, and you know that they
brought penny back, pitching.
But day two, you right? I did hit 20,000 in my pocket. I did get 100. I did. Mixon, right? That was going on in all pro punter. So yeah, it was a different feel. I mean, Cody and I is a Saints fan. I'm a Patriot fan. So like when we cut this off and when we are able to be fans, we root for our teams. But professionally, and I think even beyond that, we want to see this team do good. And so it's kind of like, man, we got to come on and talk about this.
Yeah, and just like
we can come on and talk about it.
And just like that viewer said. The first comment you gave, day one, it was like, dang, here we go again. And that's exactly what I was think about it, John. The very first move in free agency was to bring back Lonnie Johnson Jr. Now, no disrespect to Johnson.
Tweet through it.
But I'm like, come on, man. We have been talking about the all-pro caliber players that you can bring in. What I call them day one, the game changers that could get you from divisional to possibly New Orleans by 2025. And your very first move, day two. But your very first move in free agency was to sign Lonnie Johnson Jr. Yeah, it was scary at first. But boy, was there a surprise starting with the Joe Mixon trade.
Thank y'all for listening or watching the Locked On Texans podcast on this Friday. I know we went a little bit longer today, but just having a little bit of fun. I saw a comment that read 99 can be up for grabs. I mean, come on, guys. Y'all, I mean, maybe I wasn't around, but 99 for Houston ain't getting worn again.
Oh, Hunter already said he's not. He said there's a possibility.
He said he's 55.
Yeah, so he says a possibility for that, but he said, hey, quote, that's JJ number. He left it at that.
Give it up. And I saw coming, it ain't like the Michael Irvins or the Drew Pilsons. Hey, man, listen. We don't care what the Dallas Cowboys got going on, man.
Sir.
We don't give a damn. But thank y'all for watching and listening. And make sure that y'all subscribe on YouTube at Locked On Texans. Give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. And over the weekend, guys, do me a favor. Just continue to pray on the downfall for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just keep it going. Just to the football guys, keep praying that they continue to just not be good.
No, man. This might be the next best rivalry in the AFC. That's all I'm going to say. But
I think the Tennessee Titans may be a little bit better than what people think next year.
But as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.